Everyone. So like I always say, and if you're new here, you're hearing it for the first time, it's such an honor to be a host. Third year going strong. Thank you to Vicky and everyone at PBS NewsHour Classroom and to all of you for making this possible. It's such a great space for us. It started out because we were all stuck at home during COVID, and it just really makes my heart soar to see so many people still showing up after busy days at work. But I think we all know why we're here, and it's for Mark Kurlansky. I can't tell you how excited I am to have Mark here tonight. And it's not because he's here that I'm saying that. When I first heard about his book, I reached out to Vicky immediately saying, for Media Literacy Week, I have our special guest. And I was just so excited when Mark agreed to join us. His newest book, as we keep saying, is Big Lies from Socrates to Social Media. And it's actually written for a young adult audience. But as I was saying earlier, I recommend it for everyone. It's a must read for everyone in this day and age. So, he's written so many books, and I was telling him I've read most of his books and he didn't believe me, but I started listing them and I might have convinced him. I'm sure a lot of you have read them as well. Salt, Todd, he wrote another young adult book. Oh, can someone mute? Here we go. He wrote another young adult book called A World Without Fish, where he talks about the dangers of overfishing as a key part of the climate crisis. And let's just say he has a knack for really taking what appears to be on the surface pretty simple, mundane topic and really discovering how they actually have amazing origins made up of people's personal stories dating back generations. And he does an amazing job of showing us how it impacts us today. And I think as a social studies teacher, that's goals for me in every lesson. And I'm sure it is for many of you educators here today. And I think it's fair to say that Mark is a teacher supporter and cares about teaching the truth and giving young people hope. And really importantly, especially because it's Media Literacy Week, giving young people the tools to make the world a better place. So as you saw, this discussion is a part of Media Literacy Week, and we are going to discuss the main topic today is how to teach the truth in the misinformation age, as people like to call it. So I'm going to start first of all just by saying thank you, Mark, so much for joining us tonight. And my first question for you is a pretty simple one, I think. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, there's a lot of lying going on and a lot of people worrying about how to deal with it. And so it just seemed like it was the book that needed to be done at this particular moment. One of the points I make in the book is that it's not a unique moment, that there's always been lots of lying in the world. And one of the things I found interesting as I worked on the book is that lots of the lies that are on social media today are old lies. They aren't even being creative about it. They're just recircling old stuff. Unbelievable that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a lie created in Tsarist Russia about a Jewish conspiracy, is still being aired on the internet today. Can't they come up with a new anti-Semitic lie?
Right. It's the same tropes over and over again. And the way you walk through the reader, of course, it's extremely chilling I know this history, but just the way you explain it is so important. That's why I say every young person, but really every person should read this to understand that these are really just boring old lies, but very dangerous lies nonetheless. Something that you told me before we went live was interesting to me, which is that the title for your book, Big Lies, please tell them where that comes from for anyone who might not remember the history behind the phrase big lie. You actually came up with this title before a new group started using the term big lie. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was before the contemporary usage of it. Hitler in Mein Kampf talks about big lies, about how, big lies you have more force than little lies. The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it, the more outrageous you are. That's never been more true than it is with the internet, with social media. I mean, Donald Trump discovered very early in his entry into politics that the more outrageous he was, the more mileage he could get.
Right. We've seen that all too well in the past couple of years. So just transitioning a little bit, this week, as we keep saying, is Media Literacy Week. And I think everyone in here has a pretty strong handle about what media literacy is. But I'm curious just to hear from you how you define media literacy, especially after completing this amazing book that you've just put out.
Well, it's very difficult, particularly in this country, to come to terms with media and what it is and who it is and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. In most of the rest of the world, it's pretty cut and dry. All the media has some prejudice, which they declare. And, you know, if you read Le Monde or the London Times, you know exactly where they're coming from. If you read the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, or you're not really, it's not declared where they're coming from. So you have to be more careful. And sometimes they don't know where they're coming from, you know. There are, you know, there's certain media with a clear prejudice, like Fox News and MSNBC. You know, I sit there and I watch MSNBC and I agree with most of the things they're saying. And then I say, well, what's going on here? How come they, you know, they're agreeing with everything I think because they're selling to me. So
Right.
You just have to be skeptical.
Yes. I think that's a great word to use when teaching about media literacy to everyone, young and old, that there has to be a level of skepticism when watching something, when scrolling through something. Look it through an eye of skepticism. And I love what you just said about MSNBC. I have that thought too every night, like, wow, it's almost like they're inside my head. Just the conversation I had with myself walking down the street to come home to watch MSNBC. And right. So, you know,
and you leave with this feeling of everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, because they agree with me. And then
Right.
if you flip over to Fox News, you're like, wait, what country are they living in? Right. So yeah. And so reading your book, I will say, was, you know, jarring, because just knowing the deep history of this, but also weirdly comforting to know that, okay, human beings have been living through big lies, as you say, from Socrates to now to social media. I have a question, and I think maybe it's a question that is unanswerable, and hence why this book is so important, which is, and it's really just an earnest question, because you do a great job, and everyone read the book because he does a great job of really walking us through there's different gradations of lies. I thought that was a really I thought you did an excellent job explaining that, because I've thought about that too, right? I mean, part of sometimes people have lied to survive, right? But then I guess my question for you is, why do so many, and I'm sure everyone here thinks this every day, why do so many people fall for these absurd lies, these dangerous lies, not ones for survival, but maybe just for some politicians to survive?
Well, you know, that is almost unexplainable, although I do offer a possible explanation. I mean, some lies are just so ridiculous, you think, how could anybody believe this? And the answer is, it addresses something that they want to be true. You know, and if you wanted Donald Trump to win the election, against all logic, you can say, oh yes, he really won it. Or, you know, Marcos, the son in the Philippines, who told everybody that the money that his father stole was in a bank account, and an offshore bank account, and as soon as he was elected, he was going to distribute it, which of course never happened. And you think it never would happen. Why would anybody believe it? Because they wanted it to be true. You know, they wanted the things that Putin is saying about the war in Ukraine are a lot more palatable to the Russian people than the reality of it.
Right. Yeah, that is actually helps me understand it a bit more, even though it is still boggles my mind, especially some of the lies we hear today, but space lasers and all that stuff. But can you talk about that? Because that I want to hear your thoughts on the, I don't know if everyone's heard this. Well, you can tell them about it. The Jewish space laser.
Yes,
Yeah.
it turns out that Jews are in outer space shooting lasers down to cause forest fires in California. And, you know, here is the whole key to this business of lying. Look into the forest fires and how they start. Is there any logic to them being started by lasers from outer space, Jewish or otherwise? I mean, the answer to all of this is scientific method. And I would urge all of you teachers to really promote scientific method, the history of it going back to Francis Bacon. And, you know, I start my book by telling my readers, don't just blindly believe what I tell you in this book. You know, you have to question. Francis Bacon said, read not to contradict or confute, nor to believe. Read to weigh and consider things.
That is, I think I'm going to put that on my board for the rest of the year. Yeah. And just, I don't want to get too deep into the book because I want people to read it for themselves. But speaking of scientists, you made a really excellent point, I thought, about why some scientists got attacked more than others. For example, how Darwin had more people coming after him than, let's say, someone like
Newton or Einstein.
Einstein, yeah. Can you talk about that a little? Yeah,
I mean, the layman can understand what Darwin was talking about. Most of us are not equipped to argue Einstein. I mean, we barely comprehend what the theory of relativity is. We can't deny it, but we understand what evolution is. So it's, you know, the more accessible the science is, the more it invites deniers. But the important thing for students to understand, you know, somebody came up to me once, not a student, an adult came up to me once and said, you know, I like your books, but you keep talking about Darwin. What is it with you and Darwin? You know, this is just one man's theory. And I said, yes. And he would agree with you. He called it his theory. The idea is to create a theory and then invite other scientists to test this theory and constantly test it. It's been tested for over 150 years. It's set up pretty well, but look at the test. Test things.
Test things. Speaking of students a little more, most of us in this room are educators or lovers of educators. What advice do you have for us, especially in this political climate? Because there are teachers I know in this room tonight who might live in states where they have passed what they call CRT law, anti-CRT laws. I like to call them education gag orders, as stolen by from Penn America. Teachers are dealing with book bans. Teachers are worried about teaching certain topics because they might make a student uncomfortable, or at least that's how it's billed. What advice do you have for teachers who are living in these states right now, who really do want to teach the truth because, well, that's all what we all really want to do? What advice do you have for them to do that, to teach about big lies when they might be living in places where they're being told to teach the big lie?
Well, this is my advice, and I feel a little sheepish about giving teachers advice because, I mean, you do great thing and I don't do it, and who am I to tell you what to do? But this is my idea on how you might deal with this. And that is that you don't have to tell students what is true and what is a lie. If something is presented, say, okay, let's look at this. What are the arguments for it? What are the arguments against it? Analyze it, and you decide. You decide if it's true or not. I can't decide it for you. I'm not, you'll probably still be in trouble with Ron DeSantis, but.
Right. I mean, we already are just by being teachers at this point. But that actually is great advice. And that's the advice I think all of us have been kind of discussing in this forum. There's another idea about like teaching by proxy, where you don't directly teach the topic that has been banned, but you teach something like that's like very similar to, like, you could pull stories out from this book to help kids navigate what's happening now without explicitly doing it. So just find parallels in history, which you do so well in this book. So I guess.
But what do you do? What do you do
Yeah.
if you okay? So you can't teach who were the original native people in Florida, right? So who were the original native people in Florida? Let's look at origins of Florida. Who was it? Ron DeSantis was the first person in Florida? Or
Yeah,
who-
he was yeah, no, he didn't. Yes, right, exactly. Right. So you might not say, so if you're not allowed to say we're living on stolen land, right? You can have the kid.
just say whose
Yeah.
land was this and how did we get it? And look into this, figure it out.
Yeah. And if kids come to that conclusion on their own, well, they did it through research. And what is it that Bacon, now I've already forgotten what I'm writing on my board. What was Bacon's mantra? That you said?
Read not to contradict or confute, nor to,
Yes.
but to weigh and consider.
Weigh and consider.
That's the
That's
thing.
that-
Weigh and consider things. If you can teach that, if we can bring up a generation of people who just weigh and consider things, and don't wait to be told what is true and what isn't true, figure it out for themselves.
I love that. And I know there are a lot of people in the chat who have questions. So I might come back to some more questions. I just want to, we'll go back to more of my questions later. I'm going to open it up to everyone. The last question I want to ask you for now. Yeah.
I just wanted to make this one little point.
Yeah,
You always
absolutely.
remember Pizzagate, right? How it turns out Hillary Clinton was doing child pornography in the basement of this pizza parlor that I used to, by the way, go to all the time because it's next to Politics and Prose, a very good bookstore. And I used to go there after readings of Family Place. You could have a ping pong game, sit at a long table, eat pizza. And this lie was promoted that Hillary Clinton, I mean, talk about why do people believe things, that Hillary Clinton was forcing children to do pornography in the basement. So this guy, this 28-year-old guy, with two daughters, said, I can't sit by and let this happen. So he went into this place with an assault rifle and a handgun. The place cleared out pretty quickly. And he searched the place thoroughly and he discovered, guess what? There is no basement.
Right.
There's no basement at all. He finally gave up. He gave himself up. And when he was arrested, he said, well, I guess my intel wasn't 100%. Which has to be one of the great understatements.
And I was going to say that's the understatement of maybe the decade, but right. Well, there's all the others. Yeah.
But keep that idea. Try to get 100%. Make sure your intel is 100%.
Especially before showing up in some vigilante, with some vigilante plans with guns, right? Insane. Yeah. Oh, and Vicky just dropped an amazing lesson in the chat, how to teach your students about fake news. 2016, it was, wow, 2016.
That was our first lesson on, I know we don't call it fake news anymore and misinformation has replaced it, but that was our first, like, it set our major lesson on fake news was the Pizzagate, was the Comet Pizza here in DC. And so, but it's still accessed a ton. I just put it in. Some parts need to be updated, but that was also that was political because it was very like anti-Democrat. Hillary Clinton was accused of all sorts of things. And so that was an interesting point about like when you're, a lot of it does seem to be coming down to political ideology and teaching that one party sort of seems to be doing this a lot more, and to avoid that kind of hellish discussion well, it would be a great discussion in class and a lot of teachers do it, but a lot of the parts of the country, like Sari was saying, can't because of the backlash with parents. So like, I love this idea of like, it's okay, teachers, like, don't worry so much about like teaching what's true and what's fake or what's not true. I haven't heard it put like that before, and it's really freeing, almost like it's
okay, let's look at this. One of the most disturbing things to me about kids is that they have a conversation with cell phones in their hand and they add information to it that they have Googled while you're talking.
Yeah.
And they just Google it and it'll say something and they don't question who's saying it or what the source is. And when somebody does that to me, I always say, well, what is the source? And it's like they have to pick up their phone again because they hadn't even looked to see what the source was. But that's the first question you should always ask is, what is the source?
Yeah. And I think that's so important. So let's actually open it up. Jody has a question that resonates with me, and I think a lot of teachers, about how to deal with the emotion that gets in the way of people. Well, I'll let Jody, you want to ask your question?
Sure. And it's Jory, but I know it's hard to
Oh my
mistake
God, I need, my mom is
Not a big
watching.
deal.
My mom is watching. She's right. I do need to get my eyes checked. Sorry, Jory.
No big deal. No big deal. I teach in a pretty conservative community, and I've always told the kids when they ask my opinion that it's not as important what I think is and that they think, right? But emotion is something that they have to really work on. What are your suggestions, Mark, for dealing with the emotion that gets in the way of people questioning and weighing and considering because they have these strongly held beliefs because of their family or politics?
You mean because
How do you deal with that emotion?
it runs amok of their religion or what their parents taught them? You have to try to, I think, as a teacher, guide them to a sort of a cooler, rational. It's fun. It's almost like a game. Here it is. Where did this come from? Analyze it. See what you come up with. Maybe you'll show that it's right. Maybe it'll be wrong. But let's just really look at this. It's really try to teach the idea that anything is up for discussion.
That's so important, Jory, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's why it scares me that teachers are going to feel scared and about having these uncomfortable conversations that bring up emotion. Because if we can't help young people navigate and give them the tools about how to do it in the K through 12 environment, then it's only that's where we want to address it. So it's because then otherwise it's going to get baked in, and they're not going to have the tools to have conversations without emotions getting in the way. I mean, we're humans, we have emotions, but that they don't cloud the conversation discussion so you don't hear what the other person's saying and get to the truth somehow.
One of my best tools, just really quick, is questions. When I have students get angry or anything like that, I'll ask them, why do you think that? Or, just different ways of the Socratic thing works really well. Yeah.
I agree. And Collier, do you want to jump in? You just had a point that you just wrote just now. Or yeah.
Sure. Sorry. I was just wondering what you say to a student or maybe anybody who just says, well, everybody knows this is what happened, or everybody knows that.
Oh, well, the answer to that, which I think you really ought to push, is that everybody doesn't know everything. It's this everybody knows. It's just not true. You don't know what everybody knows. Some people believe that. Other people believe this. Which one is right? Well, let's look at what they believe and how it works.
Make it a puzzle. Yeah. Thank you.
I like that. Make it a puzzle. That's cool. Mary Ellen, I love what you just wrote in the chat. Can you jump in?
Sure. I just was saying that I sometimes get kind of corny, but I tell my kids, look, I know this sounds ridiculous, but you're saving the world if you can learn to have reasonable civil discourse with people you disagree with, because it's just not happening a lot of places.
Yeah, and
Yes, was it Brandeis? I always forget if this was Brandeis or Learned Hand some famous judge, I forget which one, said that the basis of democracy is accepting the possibility that you might be wrong.
I love that. That's great. Ken, you have a question about comparing 1968 to today.
Pretty straightforward. Just compare. Can you compare 1968 to today? What's similar? How much worse was it then, or how much worse is it now?
Well, let's see. Marijuana's legal. 1968 was an extraordinary phenomenon because we didn't have the kind of media we have today. And yet so many people were thinking the same things all over the world at the same time. So it came about because of a variety of historical and cultural things that took a generation, my generation, to a certain point, whether they grew up in the Soviet Union or in the US or France, people who grew up after World War II in the Cold War world, came to certain ideas that they had in common. Now today, it's very different because there's all this exchange, and people, I mean, if you're organizing something, you can organize internationally and you can put all this stuff on social media. And so it's a much less organic process by which people choose their political positions. When there's a huge movement in a certain direction, it doesn't come about because of the deep underpinnings that it once did. It comes about because, this was very well organized on social media. So we're really dealing with something very different.
Thank you. Don has a really great question / point about all this, connecting it to No Child Left Behind and testing. And this could be a whole other Zoom, but I'd love for you to bring up what you just said in the chat. You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I've been teaching for about 20 years. And I think when I first started teaching, and I came into teaching as a second career, is I thought students were very creative and questioning in their thinking towards tests. In New York State, we have something called the New York State Regents exam. And, but I found that kids would be really creative. Even if they didn't know the answer, somehow they would dig deep and try to come up with an answer. We get some creative wrong answers, but they were risk-taking. But I've noticed since then, through the years of teaching, that kids just want to know the right answer. They want to know how to play. In a way, we've made school a game. How do I get to be valedictorian? And multiple choice tests, there's only 4 answers, right? So I think this goes to media literacy because it tells students almost inherently or implicitly that there's always a right answer, that you don't need to question it anymore. And I remember reading once, and I'll stop here with this comment, just that a couple of Columbia professors, English professors, took like the English state exam for 4th graders, and they couldn't agree on some answers on the English exam because they thought of other possibilities. And so I think in our culture and schools today, especially with this driving of how many college credits can I get in high school, it's teaching kids to play a game instead of to be curious about the world and the people around them. I think being curious starts with, and then being curious leads to media literacy because you want to question everything. Does that make sense?
Yes,
yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
I completely agree with you. I mean, don't take risks because it'll endanger your getting that A, and it's all about getting the A. I sometimes think that there shouldn't be any grades. In my brief experience as a college professor, you're going to see why it's brief. I just gave everybody A's.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it gets existential. Yeah, exactly. And also, Don, I teach US history New York State Regents have been teaching it for the same amount of time as you, have seen the same thing. They've changed the format. It's the same. You're right. It's the gamification of learning. And I'm going to add on to that. My other favorite testing company, the most favorite of them all, sarcastically, I'm saying, is College Board. I teach AP US history, and the study of America is fascinating. And teaching it through a College Board lens where it's about writing an essay a certain way, taking multiple choice questions and understanding how to take them a certain way. I agree. I think it drives us farther and farther away from what I think learning should be. So can we just cancel it all? Let's just do that. So actually, and then in terms of like learning today versus learning 20 years ago, something I've also see a lot of, which Sarah brings up, which I'm glad you did. I'm going to just let Sarah ask her question.
That's a great.
Sorry. Thanks. Let's see, what was my question?
Your question was about, okay, it was about the impact of kids learning in these sound bites,
Yeah,
fast clips.
that's right. I mean, for all the gifts that technology has given us like this, thank goodness. But still, like, I've read a lot of short pieces and then Sherry Turkle's books as well about in-person versus technology and the psychology of what that does to learning. And I live at a high school, and the kids are just kind of what you're saying, Mark, like they're Googling all the time, like setting up their next quick argument that they spend 2 seconds looking for. And just how fast they are navigating technology. So there's not like any patience for deep thinking or deep reading or reading outside of your assigned reading. Like, forget that. I live at a high school. My husband's a college counselor, and he just tells his kids, you have to read. The most important thing you can do is have a book that you're reading outside of your assigned work. And now, since probably the last 8-10 years, they're like, are you crazy? I'm not going to read outside my assigned work. I have too much work. But they used to, like, and now they're just consumed with TikTok and their phones. And it's just, I don't know how we turn this around, but get rid of the APs. Sorry, Sari. I like, they're great. And I took them too, but it's just, it is a game, and it's about College Board making money. But a lot of colleges are not so interested in APs anymore. So there's a little bit of pushback.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess my question is like, how is there any way? Do we have any ideas? Mark, do you have any insight, like how to sort of fight the lies by having people who are willing to slow down a little bit?
And I also fight the algorithm, right? Because
Yeah.
I scroll through TikTok, and it's scary to see how the algorithm works. And if you dig even deeper into how it's tracking you and listening to your conversations, and that sounds crazy, but they're tracking where you are, your location, and then feeding you information to just that further, validates what you're thinking and feeling. So that's the other problem with these social media sites as well, not just the sound bites and the quick information, but the fact that it's putting people into, QAnon tunnels, Pizzagate tunnels.
Yeah, and here's the real problem, I think, with social media. I read in my book about how lying has always gone on. Plato talked about lie, but we're going to use the written word. You realize what this means about lies? When radio was invented, my God, this is going to spread lies. Everything spreads lies. So there's nothing new about it, except this. If you tell a lie, there's a certain small number of people who will believe anything, right? So if you tell a lie to 100 people, there's probably 2 or 3 who will believe it. So if you tell it to a few thousand people, a few hundred might believe it. So if you can tell it to millions of people, how many people, even though it's a minority, how many people are you talking about who will believe it? That's the real danger of social media.
The volume, the football stadium's worth of people that are looking at your tweet or looking at your post and then believing it, even if it's
Right.
right.
Right. I mean, here's the thing about being an educated, questioning person. It's hard work. You know, it's much easier to just believe what you're told and go along. You have to have intellectual curiosity. You have to be driven to want to know the truth, or you'll never get at the truth.
And that's our job as educators, because we have them in these really crucial years to somehow cut through the noise of the social media and the information silos that they already might be in, and get them to question and wonder, and throw out those multiple choice tests while we're at it. Just kidding. That's probably the hardest thing to do at this point. Liz Ramos, you have a great question about skills and daily practices. Would love for you to jump in.
Thank you. Yeah, so what skill or daily practice would you say students need most? And then I have another question that
Sorry, I didn't quite hear.
it's, what skill or daily practice would you say students need most? And then what would you say to parents? And I've surprisingly had a number of students say this, and I've had a discussion with administration on this, to parents, or about parents not wanting their students to watch the news because it's too sad or stressful. And I have AP Gov students, and I'm like, no, we're bringing in current affairs. And this is like a real issue I'm encountering for the first time this year.
Yeah, well, I think that you really have to promote this idea that it's not easy, that, you know, you have to struggle to be nobody's fool, you know. That is the goal, not to be fooled, not to be lied to or cheated, and it's not easy. So you have to work at it. You know, why do you go to school? It'd be easier not to go to school. And you go to school because you need an education, and you have to work for that.
That's another, all these things have been themes I feel like we've talked about for a few years. I think,
Yeah.
Mark, it must be your yours as a writer, i.e. 35 books that make it so that you can synthesize and say these things very clearly and succinctly. But like, I don't know if I ever said that in my 13 years of teaching to kids. Like, I mean, it seems silly, like, oh, just so you know, guys, this is actually probably going to be hard.
Right?
Yeah.
I probably would have thought like, oh, I'm going to get in trouble. Like the parents are going to be like, why are you being so mean? I'm not. I'm just letting them know that the brain's going to have to like be used. And
Exercise.
so exercised. So, anyways, do you, yeah,
can
go ahead.
You can believe everything you're told and not question anything, and you will be a fool, and people will use you and take advantage of you. You
You'll
don't
become
want
their tool. Yeah.
Another way I don't know if I ever put it. And so again,
But but I think
appreciate that.
it kind of motivates them to say, do you want to be somebody's fool, like a tool to spread their, you know, the kids use the term main character. Do you want to be the main character, or do you want to be the side character, just, you know, the tool of the main character spreading their lies for them? That might motivate them. I've noticed they all want to be you know, everyone wants to be the main character in the story. And if you're not doing your actual research, then you're just somebody's fool. I'm going to use that tomorrow, see how it works. Mary Ellen brings up very important point about empathy. In terms, I think you're responding to Liz's question about parents not wanting kids to watch the news. Mary Ellen, do you want to jump in with that?
Well, I was actually saying more for dealing with parents, because I have, yeah, I try really hard to kind of think, okay, why are they really asking me this? I had a parent not wanting me to do a DBQ on Columbus Day until I made sure to stress, I'm not telling them what to think, I'm not telling you not to celebrate Columbus Day. We're just looking at different sources. So, you know.
Where do you
I do think that the news to me is less damaging by far than things like social media, body image, and things like that, especially for my middle schoolers.
Where do you teach?
I teach at a Title I small public charter school, nonprofit charter school that's an arts integration mission, which is why I'm so lucky and I don't have to teach to the test very much.
Right.
Yeah, I
So,
mean,
yeah, Mark.
you want, there is such a thing as parenting, and you want your kids to be exposed to things, and then if it's upsetting, it's your job to deal with that, to help them. It's an important process. I don't think that the solution is for them to just have their head in the sand.
Me neither. And Don, you bring up another great point in what you've seen over I can't believe it's been 2 decades because then it's been 2 decades for me. Want to share what you just wrote about the changing, what you see in parents, the changes with them? You have to unmute, sorry.
Yep, there we go. I think this goes to something I just heard Urza Klein talking about, amusing ourselves to death, where the media has become so much the message. We think things are, just because we see a story about crime, we think crime is everywhere. And so parents, I think, internalize that, not only with the world around them, that things are awful out there, but also about schools. So I need to make sure my kid's in the perfect school. And if my kid's not learning, he doesn't have the right teacher, because we got to have all great teachers. I always say to my students and to other teachers, there's nothing wrong with having a boring teacher or a hard teacher, because you're going to have to learn how to cope. And being able to cope and struggle is one of the most, and I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, is this skill of life you need is how to struggle when things don't go your way. And I'll just bring in one last thing about this whole no child and testing culture is in New York State, we shut down schools. I've been part of 2 schools. I teach in an inner city in Syracuse. And some people wouldn't realize a small city like Syracuse, we have the 50% poverty rate, one of the poorest schools in the nation. You wouldn't think that. You'd think that'd be New York City or New York State. We have the highest homicide rate amongst kids under 18. So we have violence, but they keep shutting down our schools because supposedly our students are not doing well enough. And so we have this whole culture that I hate that US News report that ranks high schools, because we rank schools by how many AP exams. We're not grading on how, that I always say, like for basketball, I don't get to recruit my players, but it fosters this whole culture that it's the teacher's fault, the school's fault if kids aren't learning. And it takes responsibility out of the community's hands and the parents' hands, instead of them owning it and teaching kids how to cope. To me, that's the essential skill of school, is learning how to be a neighbor, how to be part of a community, and how to cope with struggle. But instead, we've flip-flopped it into, it's how we get to college and make a better life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think that, the more difficult the situation, the more you need an education process that tells you how to cope. There's this great program that I participate in where they get writers to go and give a talk in different schools. And I was sent to this very tough school in the Bronx with metal detectors and policing hallways and an extremely violent, outside my classroom, I could hear violence going on. And the students got to pick which of my books they wanted me to talk about. I wrote a book about nonviolence, and that's what they wanted me to talk about. And what they wanted to know is how can they use nonviolence, in their hallways, getting through the school. That's the purpose of the whole thing is, as a writer is how can people use what you're writing about to make their lives work?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And it all makes sense what you're saying, Don. And then a recent study came out that actually says that, you always hear people say, we have to go to college. I still think people should go to college, but if you go to college, you're going to command a higher salary. but I'm sure all of you saw that news item a couple of weeks ago that it's actually union membership that actually has, if you look at the correlation between union membership and higher income, that is more correlated than higher education, which is pretty fascinating. So I want to bring in Chris Schwam to talk about his lessons on media literacy.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. My name is Chris Schwam. I'm a youth media producer with Student Reporting Labs from PBS NewsHour. And we have a partnership with MediaWise, and they've got a group of just really fantastic students across the nation who are fact-checking viral misinformation. And they are creating videos on how to do that, how to debunk information before you share it. And what we're doing is we're taking that content that's really well produced by students. So it's students teaching students how to do this. And we're building lesson plans around them. I think Vicki had posted a link to what exists now. We're posting one per week. And there's one coming out shortly about some misinformation that's going on about Halloween candy, for example, as we approach that spooky day. So what I really like about these, as you know, I was an educator for 20 years, is that it's not the wah, it's kids talking to kids. And happy to answer any questions you may have about them. My guiding principles for this, as a former educator, but these are plug and play. So with each of the lessons, you'll have a slide deck with presenter's notes, a student handout, and a summary. So, you know, just try to reduce the lift that you have. I know that, you know, sometimes you find great materials, but to put them together so it makes sense is really difficult. You don't have time. I didn't have time. So we're trying to do that for you. And I'm trying to do this for my former self, my former educator self, you know, so that, okay, this is good information. This is a good topic. This is good content. I can just open up the slide deck and print out the notes and I'm ready to go.
That's amazing. I can't wait to check them out. And Luke is dropping some links in the chat right now with some of the lessons. And yeah, kids teaching each other is so powerful and so effective. And as Vicki said in the chat, Mark, you discuss a lot about fact checking, and I'd love to have you just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, you know, I have a background as a journalist, and in journalism, in writing books, there's this great service that's provided to you. People, you know, they go through what you've written and they question everything and try to catch you at things you get wrong. They do catch me at things I get wrong, and I'm grateful. But this is a process that, you know, so if you're in publishing or in newspapers, this process is set up for you, but in everything else in life, you need to have this process. You need to just question everything. You know, the same way you give somebody's name, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and you double check to see how he spelled it. And then you say that he said blah, blah, blah. Well, then you got to check that he really said that.
That's right. That's just like the nuts and bolts of it. And I think that a lot of people don't know how that works. So I think a lot of adults could benefit from these young people's lessons about fact checking, right? So I'm going to toss this to Vicki right now for something very exciting.
Raffle time. Who doesn't like a raffle? So we are raffling off two of Mark's books, 2 copies of. It's the same book, although I know some of you, I think Mary, well, if you've read this book already, I think a couple folks have. We could get you another one of his books if in the event we call your name. He's written 35 of them. Okay, and actually several for YA, which is awesome because if you're teaching English, literature, journalism, social studies, always good to have the YA versions, I think. I was saying earlier to Mark, like I just read those now. I just skip whatever version they put out that's longer and not as clear, and I go right to the YA version Truth. Let me know in the chat if anyone else does that. So I am not feeling so silly about that statement. Okay, here it goes. Here it goes. We have for the raffle win, Marilyn Ramirez. Marilyn, are you here?
Yes,
You
I am.
Congratulations.
Oh,
You got
thank
big lies
you.
coming. I love the front covers of Pinocchio, by the way. Kind of obvious. Don't need to explain why that's the front cover, but well done. Marilyn, where are you from and what do you teach and all that good stuff, if you're a teacher?
I'm in Washington Heights, New York City. I'm a special education teacher, and I'm also a teacher leader for the last 2 years, like right smack in the pandemic. I became a teacher leader at my school. So I'm also from the same neighborhood. I was born and raised in the same neighborhood where I teach.
wow.
I like that.
That's
I bet your kids really like that.
They do most of the time. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah, because you got their number like 12 steps ahead of them. All right, we have our second winner is I gotta make sure I'm saying it right. Okay, yes, I am. Sienna Carter. Sienna, are you here? Please. I
Oh,
hope you are.
there's Sienna.
Yes,
Yay.
Sienna. Sienna, tell us a little about yourself.
So first of all, it's actually Tara. Sienna is my daughter, and I logged in and realized that she somehow had her Zoom from a holdover from our pandemic days.
Just tell her she is not getting a copy of Big Lies.
She is
Sorry.
not, though I will use it with her. So I've been doing substitute teaching. And so I actually found some of this topic just helpful to just have on hand if there's extra time in class that I have to kill, where it kind of can fit somewhat in the lesson plan for the right grade level. So I was thrilled to sort of participate in this today. So excited to read the book.
We're so excited. Mark, I think that the chapters really are great standalone chapters, actually.
They are.
What do you think?
Yeah, sure they are. I mean, there's a chapter about science denying and the conflict of science and religion that could be a whole separate thing. I think it's a thing that helps a lot of people. It's not real, the conflict. You could be religious and scientific. I have a brother who's an Orthodox Jew and is a heart surgeon.
Right.
It's not necessarily a conflict. It's all about how you look at things. I just want to say something about the cover. I pushed to have Pinocchio on the cover. I love Pinocchio. And the reason this is an old standing fantasy, I think going back to when I was a kid, I'll be watching television, a politician will be giving a speech, like say a State of the Union address. And every time he tells a lie, you'll see his nose grow. This is something I've wished for forever. So Pinocchio is
I love that. And the Washington Post used the Pinocchios for helping us detect Trump's lies, culminating in the big lie, right? Yeah,
right.
It was like a 5 Pinocchio lie kind of thing. They had a little way of grading them. A grading system I could get behind.
Trump at this point is larger, his nose is larger than his body.
Quite a feat. Any final questions?
Did your
for
dad,
Mark?
did Dr. Rosenberg want to come in? We were talking about just like the difficulty of being young in this environment of horribleness. Just kidding. World is a great place. No, but seriously, come on. Like, how many times have you heard adults say like, oh, I'm so happy I wasn't around. I mean, social media wasn't around when I was a kid. And it's like, that's terrible. First of all, we're the ones, I think that some generation older than the current kids is the one who started social media. So that's not cool. But also like, what do you think, Dr. Rosenberg, about some of the mental, I don't know, what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, advice for mental health and kids with social media these days.
And all the lies,
I don't know if he's there. Oh, okay, next time. He's not
Next
there.
time.
I'm here.
There he is. Hi, sorry.
I totally agree with the notion that school is more than just education, reading books, learning subjects. There's a whole social, emotional, larger context that often doesn't get recognized, as several of you have pointed out. And it'd really be nice if that could be somehow integrated into this whole process of growing and learning, no matter the age. So I'm totally on board with that. And I think, as we know, a lot of schools do have mental health staffing available in case there are issues with some kids who have significant problems in their mental health arena. But overall, learning is a wide-based issue and certainly demands attention to all of the facets of learning and growing, which never ends, no matter their age.
I sometimes feel that kids are better equipped to deal with the world the way it is now than I am, because I've seen the world go through lots of different things, and I have all these different experiences which become baggage through which I see the world. To them, this is just the world. This is just what is. It's all they've ever known. And
I agree. I work, we all work with Gen Z, and I feel like they're less scarred by things because they also are so barraged by everything in a different kind of way. Yeah, they don't have the buildup of baggage like we do. Yeah, so I'd love to hear some just concluding remarks from you, Mark, just from the discussion we had tonight.
yeah, well, I think that the main point is that you have to be on your guard for people who tell you what the truth is, be they on the left or the right. There's a lot on the left that have a certain orthodox way of looking at things, and if you don't agree with that, you're a terrible person. It's from all sides. And what can I say? Think for yourself and question everything.
Think for yourself and question everything. I'm going to go watch MSNBC now. I'm just kidding. But no, think for yourself, question everything, and then go to your old comfort food of Fox News and MSNBC, and then go back to questioning things afterwards, right? But it's process, right? But I think I appreciate this discussion tonight so much. And I really, if you didn't win a book, I highly recommend getting a book, and it's going to enlighten you. And then it's also going to give you ideas for how to teach whatever subject you're teaching, or if you're not a teacher, how to teach certain things to other people in your lives, including young people and some older people who could use this book. So thank you so much, Mark. This was such a fascinating conversation. I'm so glad we recorded it so more people can listen to it later. And I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. You're all so brilliant, and I'm so blown away by all your questions and ideas, and those of you who are teachers, young people are so lucky to have you in the classroom with them every day. And I love doing these Zooms because I love highlighting how amazing America's educators are, especially in the face of some of the lies out there about what we do, right? So thank you so much to PBS NewsHour Classroom, and Vicki and Luke, for giving us this platform and for providing us with these lessons that you do every day. So I'll toss it back to, yeah.
And thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to talk to teachers. What a privilege and a pleasure.